This is Brad Saft. I'm the CEO and founder of DonorAdvisedFunds.com, and I'm so excited to be talking here to Adam Nash, the CEO and founder of Daffy.org, about all things donor advised funds, from how he got started to where we see things going, the future of DAFs, and why we both agree that everyone should have a DAF. So, jumping right in, I've heard a lot of different people's perspectives on donor advised funds, but could you share your definition of what is a donor advised fund?
I think that all these terms sound mysterious in the beginning to most people. If you think about it, why would anyone know what a 401k is? It's a line in the tax code. And yet over 40, 50 years, we've gradually educated everyone what that is. It's a retirement account that has tax advantages. Last 20, 25 years, more people have been familiar with 529 plans because that's how you can save in a tax advantaged way for college savings. Usually when I explain donor advised funds to people, I start there. It's a very simple account where you can put money aside for charity, get the charitable deduction, and it's basically just a tax advantaged account for your charitable giving. So just like you have an account for retirement, you may have an account for college savings for your kids. If charity is something that you do regularly, if you care about giving, you should have a tax advantaged account for giving. And so that's usually how I explain donor advised funds to people.
The way that I often describe it is I ask people if they own assets like stocks that can appreciate, and do they give money to charity? And if the answer is yes, and they don't have a donor advised fund, then they absolutely should, because they are giving money away to the government that they could be giving to a charity that they care about if they're not taking advantage of it.
And there's no question there are phenomenal tax advantages to having a donor advised fund. Even though the tax benefits are phenomenal, it's actually valuable without them. We know from behavioral finance that budgeting is very difficult for people. Just having a separate place for your giving, so all your tax receipts are in one place, you can set up recurring donations, just so you have one place for your giving, is something that actually a lot of people see value in. And a donor advised fund, I think, is the right account in the United States.
DAFs have grown in popularity substantially, especially in the last 5 years. I'm really interested in your initial point of the history of 401ks. Was there some tipping point where there was a trickle of growth for 10 or 20 years and then it just exploded? Do you see DAFs going along that same trajectory?
I think that with financial products, there is a tipping point that happens when enough people know about the product that if you just ask a friend or a colleague, odds are one of them are going to know something about it, right? So I think we're entering that portion of the S-curve where you see this rapid adoption, but it just comes down to who's heard about it, who knows about it. And of course, money is a trust business. How many people do you have to know? How much exposure do you have to it before you trust your own money into a new account or a new financial product?
That's a great point. And one of the biggest surprises I found since learning about the market is that donor advised funds are not a tool just for the ultra wealthy. The average donor advised fund size is like $117,000. It is something that can be a part of a philanthropic strategy for a very wide range of individuals. What have you seen in the people that have started opening their accounts with Daffy that has shown you that this is such a widely accessible market beyond what it's been in the past?
There's a lot of different value propositions that people can get from donor advised funds. For me and my co-founder, we started with the basics of there's 60 million households in the US that give to charity every year, but there are only about 1 million donor advised fund accounts. And so part of what we did was we dove in and tried to understand why. Why do people not have donor advised funds? The more we looked at that problem and looked at the incentives, we said maybe the reason that those 59 million households don't have donor advised funds is because the product isn't designed for them. And the reason the product isn't designed for them is because the existing institutions have a business model where financially it wouldn't make sense for them.
What made DAFs even come to your mind as saying, this is something I want to spend more time learning about?
The truth is, like all founder journeys, it came from multiple places. And then there's this moment where it comes together. I had learned about donor advised funds the way most people used to learn about donor advised funds, which is that I worked for a company. I was an executive, the VP of product at LinkedIn. And LinkedIn went public in 2011. And not surprisingly, it turns out when a technology company goes public, the campus becomes swarmed with accountants and financial advisors who are looking for customers who now have public stock. I ended up hiring an accountant, a great accountant, who told me about donor advised funds. In fact, he said, hey, wow, this is going to be actually generate a lot of taxes. Have you thought about giving some money to charity? And I said what I think a lot of folks in my situation said, which is I love to give to charity. I don't know if I can figure that out in just a couple months, given how late we were in the year. And he said, let me tell you about this magical account called a donor advised fund. You put money aside in this account, you get the charitable deduction right away. The money's invested tax-free. And anytime you want to give to a charity, you can. And I said, well, how much do you put in this account? And he said, well, there's no right answer, but one way you can think about it is take what you want to give to charity every year, multiply it by 10, put it aside. You had a big year, and then maybe you'll get years 11 and 12 for free based on the investment gains.
Right.
And he told me that thing that you were talking about earlier, which is the fact that when you donate stock to a donor advised fund or to charity, you get a double tax benefit, because not only do you get the charitable deduction, but you'll never pay the capital gains on that stock. And I was surprised that more people hadn't heard of it. But that's where it was filed away. Even when I was CEO of Wealthfront, I had this list of great financial products that hadn't been reinvented yet, that were trapped with the ultra wealthy, and there just wasn't general awareness of it. And donor advised funds were on that list, but couldn't figure out really what to do with it because the market just didn't look big enough to build a standalone product around. But that's when the epiphany hit. I have 4 children, and they all went to this wonderful school where one of the traditions when they were young is that all the kids on Fridays, they'd bring in spare change. They put in the little piggy bank.
Yeah.
And then every quarter, they would vote as a class which local charity to give the money to. And I was just I was thinking, what a wonderful tradition, right? Teaching the kids about giving and charity and the community. But why do we teach children to put money aside every week? But as adults, we don't. And then it clicked for me, that's not true. Wealthy people who have donor advised funds do that. They put aside money proactively for charity. They have it set aside, invested for no other purpose. And then when they are inspired to give, the money is there and available to them. And so those two things came together and really said, oh, wow, you could build a really important platform. That's how Daffy was born. And Daffy, of course, stands for the Donor Advised Fund for You. So we're definitely focused on this market.
It's interesting because my journey to starting donoradvisedfunds.com is actually pretty similar. Knew nothing at all about it. My advisor said, hey, you should check this out. I said, whoa, there's like 1,000 different DAF sponsors that you could work with. So how am I supposed to pick one? I attempted to research on the internet, looking at the difference between the big national ones, community foundations, religious foundations, how to do it. And I realized that there was no resource out there that actually provided the philanthropically minded individual with all the different options. When I recognized that didn't exist, I saw an immediate need that I wanted to fill to help people like myself understand that there are these other options to find the perfect DAF sponsor that meets their giving and donating goals.
I think it's wonderful that you put together the site for donor advised funds, because I do think more and more people are asking about the account, but it's wonderful that you're educating people. Educated consumers actually do more to shape the market. As more people learned about 401ks, they learned more about what they should be asking companies for in their 401ks. The information is critical to actually helping shape that market. I'm not surprised, actually, that your experience with donor advised funds like mine, you've probably noticed this basic fact that when you have a donor advised fund, you end up giving more. This is so obvious now, or it should be. I mean, Richard Thaler won the Nobel Prize in economics around topics that relate to this, with mental accounting and putting money aside. It turns out that one of the values of putting money aside for charity is that you've solved one of 2 big problems for giving. The first problem is, how much can I afford to give? And then the second is, who do I give it to? And there's a lot of focus on that second problem. Like, you want your money, you want your gift to do good in the world. That's why you're giving the money. But very few people focus on that first problem. But it turns out for most people, that's a very hard problem. When we get asked to give, is how much can I afford to give? And the donor advised fund, no matter how big it is, we see the same behavior pattern in people, is that whatever they can afford to put aside for charity, they put it aside. And then when the inspiration comes to give, you don't have to solve that first problem. You have this app in your pocket where you can just give money to any charity or cause that you believe in.
Yeah. One of the interesting things I think about Daffy is the focus on family and not just the individual donor. And you have a very family-friendly brand in Daffy. I see a children's book behind you. How do you think about the role of families coming together and children's involvement and how that's going to impact giving going forward?
I think the traditional industry has known for some time. If you talk to a great financial advisor, wealth manager, most of their clients are older, and they're thinking about legacy. They're thinking about their children, their grandchildren. And there's this big inspiration of like philanthropy and giving being something that you pass down. But we also see a lot of younger parents who want to find ways to involve their children. One of the features that's been very popular at Daffy that we're very proud of is that we actually have a family plan. And we made it very broad. You can add up to 24 people onto your family plan. And it's not because we think that there's so many people out there with that many children. I think that's a rare occurrence. But what we heard from our members was that they wanted to invite their parents, their siblings, their children, grandchildren, spouses, all these different people, because giving is fundamentally not something that you necessarily want to do alone. Most financial tasks are not group activities. You have your spouse, you might, there's a household thing to it, but money is fairly private for most people. But giving's a little different. There's an element of pulling people together, the bonding that comes from other people who support this organization, who work at the organization, who support the causes you believe in. And like I said, there's this educational component. And so I do think that families as a trend in giving is going to be very big, not just for households, but more focused on that kind of intergenerational pass down of information education.
In the 3+ years since you started Daffy, what's surprised you? What's been different than what you thought going into it?
There's a couple things that have been really surprising me. One is in the beginning, there's going to be a lot of people who just want to give a small amount of money to charity every year. And they just need a better product to do that. And then there'll be wealthier customers who want to do fancy things like contribute stock or mutual funds or even crypto. And we actually even set up our membership that way. And when it comes to giving, I've been really surprised at how broad the market is. I think the other surprise I've seen is just how much excitement there was around things that I thought from the technology world are pretty obvious and yet haven't existed in other donor advised funds. One of our very popular features where if you have a donor advised fund, you can run a matching campaign for any charity or set of charities that you want. It seems so obvious, and yet you don't see this level of innovation in the industry for the most part. And I think it's because we're coming at it from the technology standpoint of what can we build, what can we learn from these other successful products out there. Rather than coming from, oh, this is just one of 100 different types of accounts that a Fidelity or Schwab or Vanguard offers. We're really focused on this problem.
So when you look at the market today, and let's say we're sitting here 5 years from now, and at this point, I think you said there's 2 million DAF accounts out of 60 million potential donors. What do you think that number is going to be in 5 years? And what do you think the trajectory is going to feel like over these 5 years?
I think this is one of the fastest growing areas of all financial services right now. And I think that awareness is going to come in the next 5 years. You're going to see a lot more involvement from the existing institutions to upgrade their products and services. I think very easily that 2 million donor advised fund accounts in the next 5 years could more than double again. And then I think for our platform, I think you're going to start seeing more engagement from the nonprofit community of how they can reach these people better and interact with them. Always dangerous making these predictions. But I think by the end of this decade, the donor advised fund is just going to be one of those account types that people know about the way they know about an IRA or a 401k.
Over the past couple of years, with the growth of donor advised funds, they've come under some criticism. And I just wrote a piece about the myths and facts of donor advised funds, but I'd love to hear your take on what I think is a misconception that money that would have otherwise gone directly to charities is just staying in donor advised funds and not going anywhere. Can you share why that is not true?
I think there's actually a lot of fair criticism of donor advised funds, but a lot of it stems from the behavior at the very highest tiers of wealth. The information I have is actually that donor advised funds have payout rates and actually distribute money to charity much better than institutions that have been around for a very long time. I do think that the donor advised funds could do a lot more to encourage people to give. And actually, I think one of the problems is by focusing on the wealthy, they are focusing on people who for tax reasons might put a lot of money aside up front and then spend it down over time. Whereas most Americans tend to put money aside and give it in the same year. If you look at Daffy, we're seeing a phenomenally high donation rate. And the reason we're seeing it is because most of our members are those type of typical people who have a small set of charities they support every year. And we help them put aside a small amount of money every week or every month. So that need is funded. And so I think that as donor advised funds move in that direction and they broaden out and support, some of that criticism will turn out to be just an artifact of how the industry started.
What's fascinating about it is there is still, I believe the number is 5 times as much money in private foundations as in donor advised funds. And yet the payout rate of those private foundations is much lower than donor advised funds. And so you are seeing donor advised funds really putting that money to work in a way that private foundations are not. So I think you make a great point. So as you look forward to what's going to happen just in the next year, what's your immediate predictions on 2024 for DAFs?
I think that for 2024, in the short term, we're going to continue to see growth in the category, continue to see growth in awareness. I think your traffic will go up as more and more people want to learn about this. I'm hoping Daffy has a role to play too in terms of innovation. But I think in general, what I'm seeing from nonprofits is more and more people saying, wow, there really are a lot of people finding value in donor advised funds. What's the best way to reach them? And I think the reason that's going to happen is because it turns out donor advised funds provide something that's really valuable to those nonprofit organizations, which is the ability to provide consistent support year over year. Most nonprofits really struggle to raise money every year. Not every year is a good year. And the fact that donor advised funds are relatively stable sources of funding, that those donors are the type of people who put money aside for charity, I think in 2024, you're going to see at least a few big nonprofit organizations really push into this idea of going after the type of people who have donor advised funds as a specific way of raising money for their organization.
We've covered a lot of ground here today. I know anyone who's watching this certainly at this point wants to know what are the next steps they should take.
So as a special incentive to get started, because I really do want everyone to get started giving, I'm very happy for everyone listening to use my personal invitation link. So if you just go to daffy.org/AdamNash/invite, you'll get an extra $25 in your account when you fund it to give to any charity you want. And I think you'll find what I did when I opened my first donor advised fund more than a decade ago, is that when you put money aside for charity, you end up being more generous. And there's this weight off your shoulders every time someone asks you for a donation or to give, or you're inspired to give, of knowing that you actually have the money to do it.
And if you want to learn more about what we do at donoradvisedfunds.com, that is a pretty self-explanatory URL as well. I'm also excited to report that even though you were only founded just a couple of short years ago, Daffy has already risen up to number 2 in our DAF score rankings of the top DAFs in the United States, which really is an incredible accomplishment, having been around for such a short time. So congratulations on achieving that.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Brad. It's really a testament to the team here and the product that they're building.
I hope you all enjoyed this video, and we look forward to seeing you on each of our sites. And please reach out to either of us if you have any questions about Daffy, DAFs, or donoradvisedfunds.com. Thanks so much.